Good morning, everybody. I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. My name is Federico Peña. I'm the founder and president of IT-ROI Solutions. I'll be your speaker today. And today's topic is going to be around manipulating enterprise data with Microsoft Excel. And we're going to be focusing specifically around ServiceNow today. Before I get started, I want to go over some quick housekeeping items. First of all, at the end of the webinar, you're going to be prompted to complete a survey regarding some of the content and what you would like to see in future webinars. We encourage you to fill this in, as this provides us feedback so we can improve future presentations as well as provide the relevant content that you're interested in the future. We also encourage you to ask questions. Remember, the more questions that you ask, the more you're going to get out of this webinar. To ask questions, use the panel on the right-hand side of your screen and use the red arrow to expand the panel. You may type your questions in the question box, and I'll pause occasionally to answer them as time permits. Also note that there is a handout section in your control panel as well. From that handout section, you can download the slides from this webinar in PDF. So if you wanted to follow the slides directly from the PDF, you may do so as well. All right, so let's start. This is a quick overview of what the agenda is for the webinar. I want everyone to know that I'm going to try and keep the PowerPoint presentation relatively short, and most of the time it'll be a hands-on demo and hopefully covering use cases related to what is important to you. We're going to do a quick introduction about IT-ROI Solutions, and then a brief overview of what the Excel interface actually is, how it works. Then we're going to provide some reasons of why some of the organizations use this tool, and then we're going to dive into the demo. During the demo, we're going to have 3 different use cases, one for end users, one for administrators, and one for management. And we're going to end the webinar with a Q&A session. Usually I like to spend 15 or 20 minutes doing the Q&A session at the very end. Now, we value your input and are seeking your feedback. All right, so during this demo, I usually like to provide the webinar around cases that are important to the listeners, the people that are attending this webinar. So if you guys can do me a favor and in the next couple of minutes, start typing in inside of the question box what your ideal scenario for your organization would be to use Excel for updating ServiceNow data. And some of you might have different needs. Some of you might need to, for example, create assets, or another common scenario is as hardware assets come out of play, you might want to retire those particular hardware assets, but you have tens of thousands and you want an easy way to do this, or create risks, problems, projects, updating incidents. So what would be your ideal use case for an Excel? And what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to grab those use cases from individual people, and I'm going to try and cover them during the demo. We don't have 100% of the objects in this demo, in the Excel demo, but we do have a high percentage of the objects, so it's very possible that we're going to be able to cover a very high percentage of the use cases. So I would appreciate that you guys do put as many questions as you can, or as many use cases as you can, so we can try and cover them as much as possible. All right, so IT-ROI. I'm going to do a quick About Us slide. As an upstart enterprise integration consulting firm in 2009, our mission was to deliver technical services around the PPM space. During this time, we found that most technical consulting services could be eliminated by automating the process. So we specialized around integrations and found that most integrations were a repetitive process, although each one of them needed to be tweaked to meet a particular client's business need. We figured out that we should be able to write something that would allow us to make this a repetitive process, therefore saving end clients money. In today's environment, we focus more on providing views and ways to make people's day-to-day activities easier. So we do this by providing simple tools to manipulate complicated enterprise applications. Our focus is not only around Excel, but also around SharePoint. I'm not sure how many of you attended our webinar that we did last month regarding SharePoint and ServiceNow, but we also had a huge turnout on that. And that is also an application that we've used to make people's end users' lives a lot simpler. Now, since the days of building integrations, we now have moved to providing different options to integrating. I always tell clients, just because you can integrate doesn't mean that you should. And one of the things that we try and do is we try and teach end users and clients when they should and should not integrate. So I'm going to get into what is the Excel interface. The Excel interface is basically a unique tool that is developed to work with inside of ServiceNow data directly through Microsoft Excel. Although it's complex, to the end user it's very easy to use, and it leverages a lot of validation and functionality that's necessary to meet business rules, right? So everyone knows that most people in your organization love Excel, and getting them to try and use different tools becomes difficult. Now, the main problem with Excel is that it gives end users a lot of power to manage and manipulate data. But the problem is that it's not centralized. And what I mean by this is most people store the data in their own machines. So only they have the version of the data that is accurate. Now, since we've been seeing this problem time and time again, we wanted to come up with a solution for this. Now, let's face it, we're not going to get people to give up Excel. But what we can do is have Excel get the data from the enterprise tool. So obviously, it's the latest and greatest data, right? The end user works on that data through Excel, since that's what they like, and that's what they're going to do anyways. And then they save the data, but instead of saving it in their local machine, they're saving it to that enterprise tool. So when the next user comes in to manipulate that data, they're manipulating the latest and greatest as well. So in short, the Excel interface is a tool that allows end users to keep using Excel for their day-to-day operations. So I'm gonna get a little bit more technical on the Excel interface, right? There's hundreds of business rules that are usually implemented into a ServiceNow implementation, and these rules need to be enforced within Excel. That's sort of the power behind our Excel interface, right? There's lookups that are associated with attributes, specific business rules that need to be adhered to, and that's what makes this Excel simple to use. Whenever you manipulate the data within Excel, it is as if you were manipulating the data directly in the enterprise toolset, right? So if you have the Excel turns cells into dynamic drop-downs for data entry as well as data validation, tooltips, etc., right? So this is all configurable. So you can configure the business rules from your enterprise toolset directly in the Excel. So really, it's like updating your ServiceNow data in 4 easy steps, right? Step one, you get the data, right? Step number 2 is you modify the data, right? So you make the changes that you need to make, right? Number 3 is you validate the data to ensure that it meets the business rules. And last and not least, you load the data, or you save the data, right? When we say load, it's because you're loading it back to ServiceNow, or save would be the end user's approach to what that would look like. So at the top here, as you can see, it basically has a custom ribbon, and this custom ribbon has the get, the validate, and the load. Now, what are the benefits of managing your enterprise data via Excel? Let's talk about why customers want the Excel. And I guess this really depends on who you ask. If you ask an end user, they'll simply say because it's easy, fast, and familiar. If you ask an admin, they'll probably say because there's so much data that needs to be manipulated that it saves on coding. But if you ask management, they'll say because it'll help keep data accurate. Now, I'm sure most of you are asking yourself, what am I talking about? Let me provide you some interesting industry standards around data accuracy, right? 91% of companies say that they suffer from common data errors. And common data errors, really, there's 5 typical culprits, right? Human error, right? Lack of relevant technology, manual resources, but the most common is time-consuming, tedious, and burdensome. And what I mean by that is, somebody doesn't mind making one change, but if you have to make 1,000 changes, then people say, well, I don't really have the time to do that, right? So let me ask this question. How much money do you think your organization spends on the implementation of ServiceNow? Most of you are thinking, hundreds of thousands or maybe millions, right? Let's think about how much data accuracy costs the organization. Let's take into account like just licensing costs only. And let's put it in round numbers. Let's say your organization spends $1 million a year on licenses, right? And your data is pretty accurate. So let's say you're 80% accurate. That means you have a 20% part of your investment that's really being wasted. If you look at 20% of $1 million a year, those are large amounts of money, right? So I'm not going to say that if you implement the Excel, it's going to be perfect and you're going to have 100% accuracy. That's going to be pretty difficult to do. But if you implement something like this or this type of tool set, you might drop that from 20% to 10%. Now, and I'm saying when I say 80% is fairly accurate, most organizations are usually in the 60% data accuracy. Okay? That's the usual standard for enterprise tool sets. All right. So another main reason is, obviously data accuracy is directly related to the end user. Not because they're the only people that input the data into the system, because you might have integrations that have feeds that flow in, but the end user is really the only person that can analyze to see if the data is correct, and the only one that can really fix it. Now, most people fix a record if they're in the screen, notice the mistake, and are able to change it quickly as they're doing their day-to-day activities. But what if they notice that mistake is really replicated 100 times, right? The end user is going to think to themselves, I can't spend 4 hours fixing this data. I've got a million other things to do, right? And they can't really justify that time. So they, wait for some type of data cleanup project to occur, or they might open up a ticket to get that data fixed. But now let me ask you this question. Wouldn't it be nice if you could empower that end user to be able to fix that data? Well, if you allow them to do it through Excel, the odds are that they'll fix the data because it only takes a couple of minutes, right? And the other main reason that end users like this tool is, time saved, right? Obviously, this isn't something that's new, right? Time equals money. And of course, the more effective we can make someone's work, the more efficient they are, and the less that particular job costs, right? I'm going to give you a little synopsis. When we built the Excel interface, we didn't build it for end users or for clients. We built it internally for our consultants so they could be more productive when we were doing engagements with clients, right? And that just basically made us more competitive, right? So we used it for initial data loads, migrations, that kind of thing, right? And it was really the customers that saw our consultants using this tool that wanted it for their end users, right? And that's really how this got started. It doesn't matter really whether you're technical or not, but Excel's a super handy way to save time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start getting into the demo, and I'm going to get into some use cases. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over the use cases that came in from people, right? Updating assets, updating hardware assets, considering Excel for project templates, how does the tool work to update Excel ad hoc, bulk edits, charting, flow analysis, okay, how to upload bulk asset data into ServiceNow, create project plan in Excel and import into ServiceNow, billing perspective. All right, good. So the demo that we're going to do today is going to cover a couple of different cases. We are going to cover assets. We're specifically, the demo that I have prepared for today is around hardware assets. So the use case that we have today is, let's say, you have a company that has 3,000 computers, and I know you guys are probably thinking that's a pretty small company, but let's say that you have 3,000 that have reached the end of their lifespan and need to replace them, right? So there's a couple of things that you need to do. You need to depreciate them. You need to make them inactive. You're going to take them out of use. And then you have to create 3,000 new computers, or somebody, 3,000 new computers have to come in to the system, and you have to then turn around and assign them to people and so on, right? So that's where Excel really comes in handy. So let's go over that use case directly from within inside of Excel. All right, so here I've opened up the Excel, and as you notice, the Excel is just a typical Excel sheet. The main difference is we have a custom ribbon. Okay, within inside of this custom ribbon, okay, it says ServiceNow Excel interface, right? And you have 3 basic actions, okay? The first thing is you have your login screen, all right? This basically asks for your credentials into your ServiceNow. I'm going to put myself as a user here. Now, this means that obviously because we utilize the API layer, it's going to inherit all of your credentials, all of your security parameters directly from ServiceNow, okay? And then we have a button here on the left that says Get, okay? And you can get the data from either ServiceNow or a template. And I'm going to cover both of these in a second, right? And then once you get your data and you manipulate it, you can validate this data and then load. So think of the load the same as the save, all right? So we talked about that we wanted to do hardware assets. So I click on the Get, and then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down and I'm going to say I want to get some hardware assets, right? So what the Excel is doing right now, because I've selected to go from ServiceNow, is it's going to do a web service request for that data. The first thing it does is it prompts us with a filter. In this case, because I don't have huge amounts of data in my system, I'm going to say, get me all of the data. Now, you, of course, with inside of ServiceNow, because of the large amounts of data that you could have, you sort of want to be careful with that. And the reason is, no matter what, whenever you do a web service call, it has to pull the data, format it, and display it in Excel, right? So the more data that you have, the longer that takes. So you want to try not, if you don't have to bring back 1 million records, not only because they're difficult to work within inside of Excel when you have that much data, but just because the end user experience isn't quite as friendly as it would be, right, if you're bringing back, if it only takes 30 seconds to bring back that data as opposed to all of the data. So the first thing we want to do, as I mentioned, is we want to change the state of all of these computers. We might say, well, I want to take these, and instead of going in use, I want to go retired, right? So you notice the first thing that we have is we configured this to actually have a drop-down. So I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to say, I want to retire. And the other thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you basically what would happen if somebody entered an incorrect value, all right? So in this case here, this cell is incorrect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to validate this data, all right? So the first thing it says is I've got incorrect data, and it's highlighted in yellow, right? And it says, this value does not match the associated lookup. So I'm going to fix this record, and I'm going to validate this data again, right? It says all data is correct. Now I might want to say, I might want to edit another field here and say disposal reason. It's because it's old, and then I might change the retirement date and so on, right? And at this point here, I've already validated my data, so now I literally just need to click load, right? Now we could have done a global find and replace, and you could say take in use and replace it with retired, right? And now you can see that this request has been submitted, right? And it's now complete. So So that was pretty easy, right? Right? So now you can take large numbers of data, large amounts of data, and manipulate it very, very quickly, okay? Now then, the next thing that you're going to want to do is you probably say, well, now I need to take all of the new computers that came in and I need to put them into ServiceNow, right? But you as the admin or the person that loads this or the asset manager, you don't have that data. That data comes from accounting or from invoicing or somewhere, right, from your purchasing department. So the first thing you need to do is you need to give the purchasing department an Excel sheet that they need to fill in for you so they can send to you, all right? So I'm just going to blank out this sheet. The next step I want to do is I want to create a template, right, a blank Excel template that I'm going to send to my accounting department so they can fill in a sheet. So I say create a template, right? And the template that I want is hardware assets, okay? So this not only provides the correct headers for each one of the values, but it also grabs all of the associated lookups for all of these and stores them here. So if I come here and I go and take a look at the state, for example, it actually brings me the values, right? And what this does is this helps the end user enter the data correctly. So when they send me that sheet back, then I have that sheet that has the correct data, and the validation process is going to be much quicker because it's the data that ServiceNow is expecting, right? So I'm going to say that, yeah, I saved this template and I sent it out via email, right? And this goes out to the accounting department. The accounting department fills it in and sends it back to me. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same get data, but instead of saying I want to get the data from ServiceNow, I want to get the data from a template, right? And this is the template that that I had sent out via email and got sent back to me, right? So now it prompts me for a file, right? So I'm going to say I want to utilize this file. So I'm going to click open. And now we have all of the data, and this data is basically ready to load, right? So I can see that the state is in stock, and the next step I need to do is I'm going to click on validate. Now you can see down at the bottom, it basically goes through each phase, right, through the status bar, and it says, you know, it's validating the configuration item, and it goes through and validates every single one of the cells against the lookups that are associated with inside of the Excel interface. So, and those lookups come dynamically from your ServiceNow environment, okay? The way those lookups, we get those lookups is we have a button here that says update lookups. And the reason we don't do the update lookups dynamically every time you open it is depending on the number of values that you have, your end user experience might be slow. And when I say that, it's a lot because I'm going to provide a perfect example, which is, you know, when we say, you know, the state, well, yeah, there's only 6 lookups associated to that. But let's talk about users, right? The assigned to. You could have, I don't know, 10,000, 5,000, 50,000, right? So it, like I said, whenever you do that, it still has to go to the system, grab all of those users and bring them back so Excel can utilize that to validate, right? So depending on the number of records, it has to validate one cell at a time. So while it validates all of that data, what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that have come in since then. All right, so the other one is manage assets and CI records, configuration items, create assets, okay. Import incidents and users. Okay, we can definitely do incidents and users for sure. I see that there's a lot of background noise. Hopefully, well, obviously that's me. And hopefully that goes away. Import historic incident record data. I'd like to see how we can create and update CIs. We're in the process of moving a custom SharePoint application to ServiceNow, and you need to move content. Okay, that would work. export to Excel from SharePoint list and import it to ServiceNow tables. That would work. The entire presentation applied to Power BI. Well, we can talk about Power BI options in a bit. Now, what happens if another user exported the same data and is making updates at the same time? In that case, I'm going to say the last person to save wins, unfortunately. The advantage that we have is that we only save the data that got manipulated by the last end user. So, you know, if you only update the state, for example, and somebody else is changing the assigned to, well, you don't step on each other. The only thing that you step on is if you're both modifying the same field. Do my finance people use a template without logging in or using get? Is the template standalone? No network connections? Yes, the template is theoretically standalone. So that's why you create the template, you save that file, and you send it off to somebody so they can build it. Okay? Okay, so here I've come back. It says I've got incorrect data. It's highlighted in yellow. And okay, so I have all of my locations are incorrect here. So obviously this would be something that you'd want to send back to your end users to revalidate this data, put in the correct locations, right? And once that's done, and in this case, for the sake of time, I'm just going to drag and drop one field so I can load this data. Okay, and I've got one more field up here. And now I can take this data and load this data. Right? So I'm going to load that into ServiceNow. Now I've created all of my assets directly inside of ServiceNow from an Excel sheet that I got from my finance department. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover another use case here, another common use case that a lot of our clients really struggle with, and that is from the administrative perspective. All right, so let's talk about this load that we just did. Let's say your asset manager turns around and says, you know, that's great. We loaded all of this data, but I never loaded that data with the status in use. I loaded a different status for these projects. So as an administrator, you know, in general cases, you would have to take the end user's word for it, right? But I'm going to come back to this here, and part of what the Excel integration does is the Excel integration talks with a middleware component called the integration manager. And the integration manager is what connects to ServiceNow and what sends the web service request back and forth to ServiceNow. So we have all of the auditing, reporting, and notification components stored in a middleware. So the administrator can now come and take a look and see that load that just came in. So I'm going to refresh this screen. And okay, I'm going to wait for the hardware assets to complete loading. As you can see, it hasn't completed loading yet. That's why I don't see a little bar running across here. So I'll give it a couple of seconds. But I'm going to just select a different integration that was ran here. And in this case, right, this gives the end user or the administrator the status of that complete load, right? So it tells you it was finished, tells you who ran it, it gives you a log, as well as you can download the CSV that was ran by that end user, okay? So this gives you the ability as an administrator to check all of the data. So it gives you a complete auditing component of all of those loads. So that's the second use case, right? The second use case is for administrators to be able to not only manage the data that was loaded, but I can also manage from here, right? I can give users access and remove access for the Excel. So the other issue with the Excel is because it resides inside of the end user's desktop, right? You can tell an end users, well, you can't use it anymore, get rid of it, and they're going to say, okay, yeah, I'll delete it, but you don't really have any control. Well, from here, I can control the users that have access to run into this middleware, and I can control which interfaces they can run directly from here. And then obviously when I do that configuration, when end users come and download the Excel from here, when they download it, they'll only download it and get the interfaces that they have rights to see. And what do I mean by that? So in this case here, the get button gets grayed out for all of the interfaces that they don't have access to see. So that's really where the administrative component becomes very powerful. Right? So the administrator, the ServiceNow administrator, can now manage who gets access to what and when. Right? I'm going to go into the next use case that is another very common use case that we get from, now this is more of a management view, all right? How many of you go into meetings like a CRB, a change and review board meeting, and you say, somebody says, all right, we'll pull out all of the change requests that are in the environment and let's go through them and approve the ones and make notes on each one. And what everyone does is everyone creates their own notes and inside of their system, inside of their own files, and then they have to go back into ServiceNow and update those notes. So the common use case for this is, you know, somebody goes in, they download the change request, they have them in Excel, they go into this meeting, and inside of that meeting, they make the modifications directly in Excel, and once they're done, they literally just click save, and it saves it back to your target environment. So I'm going to come back to the Excel here and see if it's completed loading. Okay. And it's loading the disposal reason down here. It's probably got a couple of more to go. So I'm going to give a couple of these a couple of seconds more while it finishes that load. And meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if we have any additional questions. All right. So I have a question here that says, can you enforce fields in Excel like you can in ServiceNow? For example, asset tag or serial number can be mandatory to be able to identify an asset. Absolutely. Absolutely, you can make fields mandatory. The next one I have is for the second use case. Is your method better than already existing available tools available in ServiceNow? I guess that's sort of a loaded question. It really depends on, you know, what your specific needs are. But yeah, I mean, we have a high demand for this tool set. So I would say that a lot of clients believe so. Would a process bar give more info on duration? Yeah. Once the load starts, does the end user need to keep the Excel spreadsheet open? No. No. So at this point here, this load is gone. It's gone into the integration manager, right? So you can now close this Excel and do anything that you like. Okay. As I was going back to the case of the change requests, right, to the management use case, the common scenario, like it's, oh, let me just cancel this as I need to get my data from ServiceNow as opposed to from template. And I'm going to say I want to get the change request. And I'm going to say get all of the change requests that are in the system, and I click yes. So this is what a manager or an end user that's going into a CRV meeting would do as a common scenario, right? And like I said, common things that people do with inside of these CRB meetings is, they might have changes to either their change plan, backout plan, or testing plan. So here they can make their notes as needed, right? And then once they're ready, they can literally just click on load, right? And that's been submitted. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the floor for questions and answers to see if anyone has any more questions. All right. So here I have do the export limits that normally apply to ServiceNow apply? So within inside of the Excel, we do allow paging, right? So if we have that threshold of 10,000, what we do is we set up paging at 10,000, and the application will go and get you the next 10,000 and the next 10,000 and so on. So yes and no. I mean, it does apply, but it will go and get you all of the records one at a time. Can I show how PPM templates would be updated? Project management templates. So I'm assuming when you're asking about PPM templates, you're asking about task dates and so on. If that is so, no, that was a no. Maybe what we can do is we can take that offline. It sounds like you have a very specific use case, and we have received this specific request around project templates, specifically because they get stored in a different table within inside of ServiceNow. That means that your standard task editing for the templates does not apply, and editing those templates becomes a very clunky process. So we have had a couple of different solutions that we've done specifically for that, and we know that around we have had some custom solutions around project templates, around and resource allocations. What is required to have this enabled in my ServiceNow instance? I think we can just get in touch with you and we can get that implemented. It's fairly straightforward. So as far as ServiceNow, there's just a few configuration items that we need to do. And that's it. So I have another question around pricing. Well, we have lots of different options for pricing. So, in general, what we can do is, we can arrange a call to see if we can help you resolve the different use cases. And it really depends on what components you're needing. Will we be recording this webinar? Yeah, definitely. Everyone that registered to this webinar will get a replay link to the webinar. So those people that attended and the ones that didn't attend as well. Can we generate some graphs like SLA compliance and upload? So yeah, I mean, the beauty about Excel is once you're inside of Excel, right, and once you have the data inside of Excel, you can literally have a macro here, right, or a sheet here that builds graphs and grids based off of the data that's on another sheet, right? And that's standard out-of-the-box functionality of Excel that can easily be added into this, right? What this interface does, like I said, is it allows you to bring out the data, display it, right, and push it back. But just because we have it displayed like this in a grid manner in this demo doesn't mean that you're limited to this. A lot of people say, well, we have end users that like using this particular Excel. Well, what we do is we map the values to the particular Excel that they have, right? One of the key pieces that we try and do is try and keep people working the way they're currently working so they stay happy. And whenever you implement change, especially around IT, people seem to have put their feet down, right? And that's really what we try and accomplish with the Excel is, we let people work the way they want to work, right? Can we generate some graph? Okay, sorry, that was the one. You've not addressed the Power BI. Well, that's a loaded question. And maybe what we can do is we can arrange a call directly with you. Because Power BI has lots of different flavors. But yes, I mean we have done some Power BI implementations, but we usually do that through our SharePoint connector. But we arrange a call and see what what your specific needs are for the Power BI and see if we can help you accomplish that. So what we'll do is maybe if you can send me an email with your contact info, I'll get that to you ASAP. I'm just going to put my my contact information up here. I think those are all the questions that we have. Now don't forget, guys, in the handouts section, the slide deck for this webinar is available there, so please feel free to download. If there's no more questions, I'm going to give everyone back the last 15 minutes of their time. And I appreciate everyone attending this webinar. Keep in mind that we'll be probably doing another webinar in about 3 or 4 weeks. And thanks again.